Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the damp, cobbled streets of colonial Boston, where wool cloaks brush against grimy boots, and every gust of salt air from the harbor smells just faintly of fish, tar, and rebellion. You move carefully, half listening to the soft clack of carriage wheels and the faint rustle of petticoats. It's 1765, and every man you pass wears a coat knot. Just any coat, mind you, but a carefully stitched symbol of who he is, what he believes, and maybe even which side of a future war he'll end up on. Tailors aren't just snipping cloth here, they're dressing the powder keg. You duck your head beneath a hanging lantern, brush past a swinging tavern door, and you feel it in your chest, the tightness, the tension, the hum of something gathering. And here's your quiet warning. This story might look buttoned up and harmless, but it's stitched with secrets. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting a sleepy, peaceful colonial evening. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, why not drop your location and local time in the comments below? I love seeing where, in the world, we all drift off together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past the candlelit windows of Boston's North End, drawn to a warm glow behind thick glass. Inside, you glimpse rows of neatly stacked cloth bolts, deep navy wools, dull browns, the occasional luxurious crimson, and in the corner, a tailor hunched over a form, threading a needle with the kind of concentration usually reserved for surgery or poetry. He doesn't see you, not really. He's deep inside the coat he's making. It looks simple, mid-thigh length, broad cuffs, modest collar, but this is the kind of garment that takes 30 hours to make, by hand, and might cost a full month's wages. It's the uniform of an era, and it's as crucial to a man's identity as his name or accent. What's under the coat might be grimy, patched, or threadbare, but the coat itself, that's where a man makes his statement. You hover just behind his shoulder, watching as he pulls the thread through a tight stitch. It whispers. There's something almost meditative about it, the rhythm, the soft drag of linen thread, the creak of leather thimbles. This is what most people forget when they think of revolutions. They start in quiet places, not on battlefields, but in tailor shops, printing presses, and pub back rooms. That coat he's making, it's not for warmth, it's for presence. In colonial Boston, your coat says whether you're a merchant or a farmer, a loyalist or a patriot. Sometimes it even says, if you'll live through the next riot. And coats weren't easy to come by. Cloth was imported, taxed, inspected, and in short supply. You feel a sudden sympathy for this tailor. You wouldn't want to be in the middle of a colonial customs scandal. Historians still argue whether the average tailor was secretly political or just too overworked to care. But one thing's clear. If your coat looked too British, you risked getting jeered in the street. If it looked too patriot, you might get arrested. And don't even think about wearing French brocade, unless you really wanted to cause a stir. You wander out again, passing a half-shuttered milliner's shop. The window displays a single elegant cloak, buttons winking under candlelight. Here's something strange. Buttons weren't just decorative. In colonial Boston, they were often functional status symbols. Some were made of brass, others of bone. And the fancier ones, gold-plated pewter or mother-of-pearl. Buttons could be engraved with initials, symbols, even tiny Masonic signs. There were rumors, yes, even back then, that some tailors sewed secret codes into button arrangements. 3 buttons on the cuff. Patriot 2. Loyalist. Who knows? Maybe it was just fashion. But maybe you could decode a man's allegiance by the way his coat closed. Historians haven't settled on that one yet. You cross into the South End and pause near the Common Green. A group of redcoats marches past in perfect formation, their coats bright crimson, tight at the waist. Buttons lined like precision instruments are tailored with military severity. You imagine the tailor who made them, carefully folding back lapels to allow for musket movement, stitching the shoulder seams foursquare posture. British coats were intimidating, expensive, and, let's be honest, not all that breathable. You'd be sweating by the time you reached the harbor. But it wasn't about comfort. It was about control, uniformity, presence. The way your coat flared when you turned sharply on your heel. Meanwhile, colonial coats were, let's call them creative. Often handmade or modified from older garments, they were stitched from leftover cloth, trade linen, homespun wool. Some were lined with whatever was available: old bedsheets, bark-dyed muslin, even recycled sackcloth. One tailor, according to a fringe letter from 1771, allegedly patted a client's coat with dried corn husks for insulation. It rustled when he walked. That's one way to make an entrance. You step inside another shop now, this one smaller, messier. The workbench is covered in pins and chalk dust, and there's a scrap of velvet with a crude sketch of a dragon stitched into it, maybe for a child, maybe for someone with a little too much free time. But that's the thing about these coat makers. They weren't just sewing clothes, they were embedding culture into thread. Some stitched jokes into inner linings. Others added hidden initials. A few rebellious types even slipped revolutionary symbols into pocket flaps. Did it matter? Probably not to the British. But it mattered to the wearer. It made them feel seen. And in an era where politics could get you hanged, a little pocket rebellion went a long way. And now, as the night air thickens, and you feel your breath settle into the slower rhythm of sleep, imagine yourself walking in one of those coats, the buttons cool against your chest, the seams tight where they need to be, the fabric stiff but comforting, like armor sewn by someone who believed in the shape of your shoulders. You're not just a sleepy time traveler. Now you're part of a revolution in disguise, one stitch at a time. You pull your coat tighter around your shoulders as a cold breeze slips between the crooked buildings of Boston's harbor district. The air heavy with the scent of brine, pipe smoke, and damp timber. The fog is low, but you can still see the way the cloth merchant on the corner tugs his own worn coat closed, its cuffs fraying despite the neatness of its buttons. And your eye drifts across the bolts of fabric he has lined up under an awning that seems permanently damp. There's wool dyed in a grim array of stormy grays and muddy browns. There's a sun-faded crimson that might once have been respectable British scarlet, but now looks more like tired cranberry. And then there's a strange striped fabric that smells suspiciously of whale oil, which it very well might be. Colonial tailors worked with whatever they could get their calloused fingers on. And if that meant using whalebone as stiffeners, or muskrat fur as trim, well, you did what you had to do. You step into the narrow shop, across from the cloth stall, ducking beneath a doorway framed in curling wood, and you immediately smell lanolin, pine tar, beeswax, and the faint trace of damp mildew, and you think, yes, this is the scent of revolutionary fashion in its infancy. The tailor inside is already at work, not with cloth, but with a thick length of what looks like homespun wool, threading heavy twine through it like he's lacing a ship's sail, rather than creating something to be worn by a man or possibly a woman of means. On the walls hang finished coats, all buttoned, pinned, and puffed up to hold their shape. The buttons are mismatched. You spot bone, pewter, and one that might be pressed shell, all arranged with what you assume is intentional eccentricity. But then, it was a different time. In an era where a man might own only one good coat, that coat had to do the work of 10. It had to keep him warm in the harbor winds, presentable in a tavern argument, respectful in church, and intimidating in the face of a red coat. Tailors didn't just sew for warmth, they sewed for survival. The average coat took days to complete. First came the measurements, which were sometimes done with strips of string, when proper rulers weren't available. Next came the selection of cloth, and here things got political very quickly. Cloth was a colonial battlefield. Wool from England, taxed to the hilt. Homespun from Virginia, considered patriotic, but often inferior. Smuggled French silk, risky, expensive, and thrilling. You remember from a dusty corner of your memory, possibly something you read or overheard in a reenactment. How many colonists began to boycott imported British cloth after the Stamp Act of 1765, preferring instead to spin their own thread. In what were called spinning bees, semi-social, semi-political gatherings, where women, mostly, turned flax and wool into homespun linen with the kind of determined focus usually reserved for courtroom lawyers or doulas. You can imagine it now, the hum of spinning wheels, the occasional cluck of judgment when someone revealed they still used imported cotton from Liverpool. The shared silence as women and girls turned thread into resistance, one spin at a time. And the tailors. They worked with what arrived crude, inconsistent, but patriotic. When cloth ran short, they scavenged. Old coats were turned inside out. Drapes became overcoats. In one rumored case, though historians debate the truth of, tavern owner sacrificed his pub's entire supply of table linens so that a local militia could have matching cuffs. Imagine that. Soldiers marching to battle, wearing sleeves stitched from red wine-stained napkins and gravy-splotched tablecloths. But what mattered wasn't the elegance, it was unity. Uniformity, however, patchaments solidarity. But the raw materials weren't always cooperative. Colonial wool, often thick and coarse, wasn't soft or supple. It was itchy. It held odors. If improperly cleaned, it attracted weevils, which could ruin a coat from the inside out before the wearer even noticed. Worse still, some cloth, especially when dyed improperly, would bleed in the rain, staining a man's hands, his undershirt, and anything he touched. There's a half-confirmed tale of a Boston merchant who leaned on a whitewashed post during a drizzle only to leave behind a perfect crimson shoulder print. The coat, it turned out, had been dyed with cheap imported cochineal bug-based dye, had never been set with vinegar. His wife never let him live it down. Meanwhile, tailors experimented constantly. Without access to industrial dyes, they turned to what they could find: bark, berries, moss, iron nails soaked in vinegar. Blue was notoriously difficult to achieve, unless you had access to indigo, which was both expensive and dangerous to produce. Still, everyone wanted blue. Why? Because red was the color of the enemy, and white just got dirty too fast. The result? A preposterous number of muddy, patchy navy coats parading around colonial Boston like confused peacocks, each trying not to look like they were just colored with boiled blueberries. The strange part is how this scrappiness, this patchwork approach to tailoring actually became a kind of statement. You weren't poorly dressed, you were patriotically dressed, a frayed cuff, a sign of commitment to the cause, uneven lapels, a symbol of homespun resistance. You wore your ragged edges like medals. And as you move through the tailor's shop now, stepping past a sleeping dog curled near a bucket of pins, you hear the whispered complaints of two apprentices in the back room, struggling with a roll of wool that smells faintly like dried fish. "It's from Maine," one of them mutters, "caught in the net with the cod." You don't ask if he's joking. There's probably some truth in it. Tailors learned to work with smells. They smoked their shops with tobacco or cloves. They hung orange peels in their workrooms. They rubbed beeswax on their hands to mask the oils of their skin and to help the thread glide easier through cloth. Some even kept cat's knot, just for companionship, but for pest control. Mice loved cloth. Moths were the enemy. The tailor's world was one of constant, quiet battles. You might think that stitching a coat was a peaceful task, but in truth, it was a war of frays and folds, of slips and tugs, of measuring tape and gut instinct, and always, just beneath the surface, politics. By 1767, the town Shendaks had inflamed tempers across the colonies, especially among merchants and artisans. Cloth prices surged. British customs agents became more aggressive. Tailors began to grumble. Some stopped using British cloth altogether. Others charged extra if the customer insisted on it. You remember hearing of one tailor named Long Lost to history who supposedly spit on any customer who requested British buttons. This probably didn't win him much business, but it earned him a place in the whispered mythology of Boston's back alleys. And maybe that's what this is all really about. Not the coats themselves, but the myths sewn into them. The whispered stories passed from tailor to apprentice, from merchant to dock worker. Stories of coats so stiff they stood upright on their own, coats with hidden pockets for smuggled pamphlets. Coats lined with old letters, sewn shut forever like stitched-up secrets. Historians still argue whether any of it actually happened, whether any coat really changed the course of the war, but you can't help but feel the weight of it now. In the silence of this tiny shop, in the soft hiss of the tailor's needle, as it pulls thread through damp wool, in the way your own shoulders begin to ache, just from watching. These were not just garments, they were declarations, not sewn in haste, but in careful, deliberate, sleepless hours. And as the fog thickens outside, and you prepare to drift a little deeper into this wool-scented dreamscape, you feel something you hadn't expected. A quiet reverence for every uneven seam, every mismatched button, every tiny rebellion disguised as a decorative cuff. You realize this revolution didn't start with a shot. It started with a stitch. The next morning in your slow dream through colonial Boston comes with the faint creaking of floorboards and the scratch of a rooster 2 streets away. Muffled behind heavy shutters and the thick fog that refuses to lift, clinging to everything, like a damp shawl. You rise, or rather, you drift forward into the life of someone whose days begin with thread and end in backache. You're now the apprentice of a well-known, if short-tempered, master tailor, whose hands are so steady it's whispered he could stitch blindfolded, though he's never confirmed or denied it. The apprenticeship isn't glamorous. It starts with sweeping the floor, cleaning the pins off the work table, refilling wax, trimming candle wicks, and refolding every bolt of cloth each time a customer even breathes near one. And when there are no customers, you iron with a block of cast iron that's been heated over a fire. You press sleeves and collars until your shoulders cramp, and you say yes, sir, and no, sir more times than you blink. At first, you think it's all about clothing, that you're here to learn how to sew and tailor, and maybe one day open a shop of your own. But by the end of the first month, you begin to realize you're learning something very different. You're learning how to read people by their cloth. Your master explains, through gritted teeth, and always while stabbing at a hemline, that the way a man folds his coat before hanging it says more about him than any speech. But customers who want soft linings tend to be secretly anxious, that men who ask for extra buttons are either planning to bribe someone or be bribed. That linen dyed too perfectly black means someone's hiding something, probably from the taxman. You think he's joking until a week later, a man comes in wearing such a coat, and your master refuses to serve him. No explanation. Just silence, and a door gently closed in the man's face. You don't stitch for liars, he mutters afterward. Coats remember things. And you begin to understand that you're not just learning a trade. You're being trained in a quiet sort of espionage, one that sees the threads between people before they tangle. In the back room, the other apprentices confirm it. They whisper stories over boiled turnips and stale bread about tailors who stitched notes into seams, who passed messages hidden in coat padding, who worked for both sides and died with needles in their hands. One claims that Paul Revere himself once wore a waistcoat with a secret flap, designed by his cousin's tailor, a tiny pocket stitched just beneath the left armpit where he kept a folded map. Another tells of a widow tailor who, after her husband was jailed for printing pamphlets, lined her clients' coats with pages from banned newspapers, upside down and carefully stitched in place. "No one ever checks under the arms," she supposedly said. Historians still argue whether any of these stories are true or whether they were inventions to make tailors sound braver than they were. But truth doesn't matter as much as repetition, and these stories pass from threadbare mouths to eager ears like warmth in winter. Your days blur into weeks, and every moment is filled with the hiss of thread, the stink of dye, and the ache of trying to make perfection out of uneven cloth. Your fingertips become raw from pushing needles through layers of wool. Your knuckles crack from the cold. You dream in stitches. And then, one day, everything changes. You're allowed to cut. Not cloth, no. Not yet, but patterns. Paper templates, carefully drawn by the master, with sweeping curves and jagged angles that you don't yet understand, but follow religiously. Your first attempt is uneven. The master says nothing. The second is better. By the third, you earn a grunt. That grunt means you're ready. Cloth arrives in the next shipment, from New York, blessedly not taxed. As it slipped through the British inspection, thanks to a certain well-placed bribe involving a barrel of salted herring. It's a gray-blue wool, rough but tightly woven, with a strange metallic sheen when caught in candlelight. The master hands you a sleeve pattern and says, "Don't ruin it." That's his way of saying he trusts you. You cut with hands that tremble slightly, and you breathe only when it's over. The sleeve is perfect or close enough that he nods and doesn't insult your lineage. And then you learn something new. Cutting cloth is terrifying. It's final. Once cut, it cannot be undone. Tailors who cut poorly don't last. There's no forgiveness in wool. You learn, slowly, to trust your eyes, to measure twice, then measure. Again you understand now why your master drinks. Not out of despair, but necessity. It takes nerve to make anything this permanent. In your off hours, such as they are, you're tasked with delivery. That's how you meet the wider world, trudging through the slush and muck with a coat wrapped in linen, trying not to slip while mentally rehearsing your greeting. Some customers live in townhouses so grand they seem transplanted from another reality. Others reside above butcher shops or beside noisy taverns, but all care deeply about their coats. One man insists his be lined with rabbit fur for reasons of health. Another demands hidden pockets for tobacco, coins, and dodly teeth. One memorable client wants his buttons to spell out his initials in Morse code, a language you don't think has even been invented yet, but he insists it's fashionable in France. You nod and say you'll ask the master. He rolls his eyes, but makes it happen anyway. Customers come in with tales, too. A preacher whose sleeve was torn during a sermon bemoans the devil's grip. A merchant argues that his rival's coat has more French trim and demands yours match it stitch for stitch, or he'll lose business. One night late, a woman arrives with a bundle and a hushed voice. Her husband needs a coat. It must be blue, dark, but not black, with 3 pockets, 1 extra deep. She won't say why. The master doesn't ask. He just measures the bundle of cloth she brought, likely stolen or borrowed, and begins to cut. You watch, breathless. This is not tailoring. This is quiet warcraft. You realize now that every apprentice, every tailor, is a witness to things no one else sees. Private things, dangerous things, and yet no one suspects the tailor. Your background noise, your furniture, you're the hands behind the buttons. One evening, your master pauses while setting a cuff and tells you about his own apprenticeship in London, before he fled debt or disgrace, he won't say which. There, he says. A tailor could work 30 years and never see a musket. Here, he says. He stitched 6 coats for men who marched the next day. Only 2 came back. One returned with blood still drying on the lapel. He asked for a new lining. Did you do it? You ask. Of course, the master replies. Blood's bad for morale. And you understand now that being a tailor here, in Boston, in these years, is like being a quiet surgeon of society. You patch up what's broken. You prepare men for battles they won't name. You stitch the dreams of freedom into seams they won't acknowledge. And always, you remain invisible. But not unimportant. Never unimportant. That night, as the shutters rattle in the wind, and you curl beside the dying fire, a finished coat hangs near the window, its buttons gleaming softly in the candlelight. You look at it and see more than clothing. You see weeks of whispered labor, fragments of gossip and ideology, scraps of silk and truth, all held together by thread and hope. You think maybe one day, long after the smoke clears and the flags are folded, someone will find this coat in a trunk, smell the wool and beeswax, and wonder what part it played. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember you not by name, but by stitch. You begin to notice that the tailor's shop, small as it is, serves as more than just a place to commission a coat or mend a torn hem. It's become a kind of whispering post for the whole neighborhood, a quiet crossroad where ideas, rumors, and secrets are passed in low voices under the scratch of shears and the rhythm of the needle. You never quite realized how public-private a tailor's life was, until now how every conversation in that shop, whether it be about fabric, weight, or hem length, somehow drifts toward something else entirely. You're cutting out lining for a waistcoat one day, hunched at the work table with pins between your lips and thread clutched in your fingers. When 2 customers start talking in the front room about a new set of taxes, you barely look up. Taxes are as common as damp socks in Boston, but this one seems to light a different kind of fire. They speak in hushed tones about town meetings, about protest leaflets printed in secret, about shipments of goods being sent back across the sea rather than taxed into oblivion. One of the men gestures to his coat collar and says, "You think they'll notice if I swap the velvet for linen?" The other scoffs, "Only if they search you, and by then, it's too late." It doesn't seem like much at first, just idle talk, but then another customer comes in later that day and requests a red thread sewn into the inside hem of his jacket. He says it's for identification, but doesn't say to whom. Then a woman brings in her husband's overcoat and asks that the top button be sewn on slightly off-center, just enough to be noticed by the right people. She says with a knowing smile. The tailor doesn't ask questions. He just nods and hands you the work without a word. You do it carefully, your hands a little sweatier than usual, and you start to wonder how many of these small, odd tailoring requests are signs, signals, threads, in a much larger pattern that's being woven all around you. Historians still argue whether colonial tailor shops like this were actually used as unofficial hubs for revolutionary plotting, or whether we've just mythologized them in hindsight. But standing there among the wax and the wool, you don't need a textbook to tell you something's happening beneath the stitches. These aren't just garments, they're uniforms for a war that hasn't officially begun, and yet everyone knows it's coming. The shop becomes even busier, and you realize that the tailors are the only ones who touch nearly every man in town. They measure them, adjust their posture, tap their chests for sizing. If anyone wanted to recruit quietly, or pass along word of a meeting, who better than someone already trusted to adjust your inseam? One evening, a local preacher comes in, his hat pulled low, and his voice low. He wants a coat refitted, yes, but he also mentions needing a gathering place, and wonders aloud if the back room, yes, the one where you and the other apprentices usually eat your lunch, could be used once or twice a week. Your master gives him a look that you don't quite understand, something between concern and commitment, and says nothing. 2 nights later, you're sweeping the back room and find a folded pamphlet under a loose floorboard. The words are hand-printed and angry. "The time for whispers is ending," it says. "The needle will soon give way to the musket." You don't show it to anyone. You put it back where you found it, but from that moment, the shop feels heavier. The thread reels seem taller, the needles sharper. You look at every customer differently. Who's in, who's out? Does that man want an extra deep pocket for coins, or for something else? Why does the woman ordering her husband's frock coat need extra buttons, just in case? Nothing is ordinary anymore. Even the fabrics are taking sides. English broadcloth is suddenly out of favor. Even wealthy loyalists begin asking for less conspicuous materials, dark colors, simple cuts. No trim, one says sharply. And none of those flashy cuffs. People want to blend in, and you begin to sense that fashion is becoming camouflage. The colors worn in the street say more than any speech from the pulpit. Blue is rising in popularity, perhaps by accident, perhaps by intention. Read, a risky choice. Wearing red now can get you shouted at, even followed. Once, a man in a crimson waistcoat walks past the shop, and someone throws a rotten apple at him. His crime, merely resembling a British officer. The tailor turns to you as you're winding thread, and mutters, "This is how it begins. Lad, not with war cries, but with wardrobe changes." And he's right. As the season turns, and the air thickens with the scent of chimney smoke, the very atmosphere in Boston seems taut with expectation. There's a rhythm to the city now, like a great breath being held. In the shop, everything is faster, tenser. People need coats, not just for church or social calls, but for late-night meetings, for walks that may turn into flights. You make 3 nearly identical waistcoats for a man who looks over his shoulder with every stitch you take. When you ask if he'd like different linings, he shakes his head. "They're not for different moods," he says. "They're 4 different names." You realize you've just made disguises. No one says it. No one has to. There's an energy that hums under the wooden floorboards now, under every button you attach and every lapel you press flat. You start to dream in thread patterns, not abstract but real secret coats with hidden messages. Seams that can be ripped out to reveal something urgent beneath. Even the pins seem to prick harder. One afternoon, you walk into the back room and find your master with 2 men you don't recognize. They're not customers. One wears riding boots streaked with mud, and the other is holding a crude sketch of a British officer's uniform. They're talking softly about dimensions, fabric choices, and oddly how fast someone could tailor something to look like the real thing. You linger just long enough to hear the phrase "supply confusion," and then you make noise on purpose to alert them. They fall silent. Your master looks up and tells you to check the lamp oil in front. You do as you're told. The conversation ends, but you know what you heard. And it's not long after that you begin to hear new phrases whispered around town. The Liberty Boys, committees of correspondence, marches. And always, somehow, the tailor shop stays 1 step ahead. It's not surprising. Tailors hear everything. You take measurements of militiamen who arrive with bruised knuckles, and leave with neatly trimmed jackets. You mend a tear in the coat of a boy who was caught chalking political slogans on the side of a British warehouse. The tear is jagged, but you fix it so well that even your master nods. You feel proud, but you also feel something else like. The stitches you've made carry meaning now. You're no longer just an apprentice. You're part of something bigger, stitched into the growing movement without ever having declared a side. One night, as you're locking up, you notice a strip of cloth tacked to the underside of the workbench. It's tiny, no bigger than your thumb, and dyed a dull indigo. You ask your master what it is. He doesn't look up from his tea. "It's a signal," he says, "that we're open for truth." You're not sure what that means, but it stays there, and every morning when you arrive, you check that it hasn't been removed. As long as it's there, you feel safe. As the fire dies down and the shop falls into the hush of nighttime once more, you lie back on your cot in the corner of the room, the smells of wool and wax in your nostrils, and the rhythmic scratch of mice in the rafters overhead. You stare at the ceiling beams and think about all the coats you've helped make, about where they are now. What conversations they've heard, what hands have reached into their pockets to pull out more than just a coin or a handkerchief. You think about how revolutions aren't always born in blood, but in fabric, quietly, stitch by stitch. You wake before dawn, before the frost has melted off the inside of the window panes, before the horses down the street begin to stamp their hooves, before the city's heartbeat kicks back into motion. The fire is down to cold embers, but the coat hanging from the peg near the door holds the last warmth from last night's labor, its wool gently steaming in the dim lamplight. You stretch your arms and ease into another day of silent, relentless motion stitching, pressing, measuring, fetching, and, as you wash your hands in cold water that smells faintly of tin and ash, you hear the first hammer blow of protest from outside, someone slamming a cart shut with unnecessary force, muttering about those cursed taxes and how even coat buttons now feel like an indulgence. This is the morning you begin to feel the taxes in your fingers, not just in what they cost your customers, but in how they change what's even possible to make. Cloth is harder to come by this week. The bolts arriving by ship are thinner, scratchier, and more unevenly dyed than ever before. Some are completely missing, lost to customs seizures, delays, or mysteriously redirected elsewhere. One shipment of high-quality crimson wool never makes it past the docks. Rumor has it a redcoat commander requisitioned the whole lot for officer uniforms, though no one has proof. The tailor merely raises an eyebrow when he hears and adjusts the prices for the cloth he still has. You're now cutting sleeve linings from discarded curtains. A coat meant for a lawyer is finished using leftover lace from a wedding gown. You stitch with thread that was once intended for sailcloth because the linen thread is simply gone. You begin to understand, in the weary bones of your hands, just how devastating the Crown's economic stranglehold is, not in abstract speeches, but in warped fabric, dulled needles, and a supply shelf that looks emptier every week. Your master runs a hand over the empty spools and says quietly, "They want to starve us before they fight us." You don't know if he means tailors, colonists, or both. Probably both. And then the real absurdity begins, because what should have been simple garments suddenly require negotiation. "I need a new coat," a merchant says one morning, "but it must not look new. If it looks new, they'll think I paid the tax. And if it looks too ragged, they'll think I support the rebellion too loudly." You blink at him. "So you want a slightly used-looking coat?" He nods, very seriously. With dignity, he adds. Your master accepts the challenge without flinching. You learn to artificially age lapels with a stone. You scuff hems just enough to imply wear without suggesting poverty. You make expensive coats that look plain, and poor coats that hide wealth, in secret linings. One waistcoat is ordered with a fold-out pocket behind the breast, for securing a ledger, or a pamphlet, or a pistol, depending on the hour. The man says this with a smirk. The tailor doesn't ask which he'll carry. Meanwhile, a strange sense of clothing anxiety settles over the neighborhood. People come into the shop more often now, not to buy or repair, but to ask, "Do you think this looks too English? Is this color safe to wear near the harbor? Would a British officer know this cut from a militia coat?" You become a fashion therapist, offering measured answers while smoothing cuffs and taking in seams. And then, of course, there's the matter of the buttons. Oh, the buttons. In a normal world, they're just fasteners. But now, they're everywhere and nowhere. Brass buttons, taxed beyond reach. Pewter, British sourced, wood, cheap-looking bone, hard to acquire. One woman arrives, clutching a pouch filled with mismatched buttons, family heirlooms, trade scraps, and one that she swears was once on a royal courtier's coat in Paris. "Use these," she says. "Make it say something." The tailor complies, arranging the buttons down her son's coat in a deliberately uneven line. 4 large, 1 small. 2 large again, an odd rhythm that means nothing to most, but perhaps everything to someone who's watching. Another man insists his buttons be sewn with red thread, to show the blood already spilled, he says. The tailor agrees, but warns him, be prepared to explain it to anyone who asks. The man only nods. Historians still debate whether such small signals actually meant anything or whether colonists just imagined them in retrospect, romanticizing every stitch as an act of protest. But standing there in that smoky, wool-scented shop, with the light filtering through wax-streaked windows and your fingers wrapped around yet another mismatched button, you know the truth doesn't matter. The intention is there, and it spreads. Soon, other tailors in other neighborhoods adopt subtle symbols: extra cuffs, diagonal buttonholes, unusually long coat flaps. Some of it is just fashion. Some of it isn't. A militia recruiter who stops in for repairs tells you about a captain whose coat collar is always turned up to hide a red stitch shaped like a feather, a private emblem shared only by the men in his unit. "It's how we know each other," he says. "Better than a flag." You nod, silently filing the detail away. Another customer comes in with a pamphlet tucked into his sleeve, and leaves it, very deliberately, on the work table before walking out. You glance down. It's a screed against the customs officers, accusing them of hoarding cloth in secret warehouses. You show it to your master. He reads it, sighs, and places it in the same loose floorboard you've come to recognize as the unofficial archive. Your shop is no longer just a tailor's. It's a bulletin board, a node, a pressure point. A coat arrives one day, sent by courier. No note, no instruction, just the garment. You unroll it, and see that it's been slashed down the back, then badly mended. Not a tailoring job, not a wear and tear. Issue this is a warning, a threat. Your master stares at it for a long time. Then he throws it into the fire. He turns to you and says, "We won't repair fear." You don't sleep well that night. That same week, a new decree arrives, one that taxes finished garments rather than raw cloth. It's a clever move. They know tailors have been skirting import duties by assembling locally. Now, they aim to punish that, too. Prices rise again. Customers grumble. One man punches a wall when he hears the cost of a waistcoat and storms out. You sew in silence, your jaw tense. That night your master cuts the lining of a coat from an old flag, its stripes faded but visible. "It's a coat for mourning," he says. "For the death of fairness." You don't know whether to laugh or cry, probably both. And then something shifts. Word spreads of British officers harassing tailors who appear sympathetic to the cause. One is fined for insulting the crown when he uses blue thread too prominently. Another has his shop raided. The message is clear: stay neutral, or pay the price. Your master responds by removing the shop sign altogether. No name, no advertisement, just a blank board swinging in the wind. But the customers still come. Now they knock twice. Now they speak in code. "I need a coat for colder climates," one man says, clearly referring to Canada, "with a heavy lining and extra room in the back." You add the hidden pouch automatically. "My cousin needs a garment for overseas," another says. You give him a coat with extra stitching at the hem, something that can be unraveled quickly. "My son," says one older woman, voice shaking, "needs a coat that says, 'I'm not afraid.'" The master gives her a bright blue wool, the last in the shop, and sews it with white buttons, in the shape of stars. He doesn't charge her. The shop is nearly silent now. Not for lack of work, but because the stakes have grown so high that speech feels dangerous. You work with your head down, your ears open. Even the dog, usually lazy and snoring by the hearth, seems to watch the door more closely now. Every coat you finish feels like a risk, but also, oddly, like a promise. One night, very late, as the candles burn low and the frost curls along the glass panes in gentle spirals, you look around and realize the shop has changed. It no longer feels like a place where coats are made. It feels like a place where a revolution is waiting for its coat to be finished. You set down your needle. The silence is complete. Outside, snow has begun to fall silent, slow, soft as wool. You blink against the pale gray light slipping through the uneven window panes. And the first thing you notice isn't the cold or the quiet, but the sound of paper crackling underfoot as you step onto the shop floor sheets of rough inkstain. Broadsides scattered across the boards like fallen leaves, each printed with a headline that feels more urgent than the last. The Liberty Boys rise. The King's buttons aren't welcome here. The thread of empire is unraveling. Someone must have slipped them under the door in the early morning hours, the way rebels do when their messages are meant for hearts rather than hands. Your master says nothing when he sees them. He just sweeps them into the hearth and lights. The kindling, the flame catches fast, too fast, as if the words were written not just in ink but in dry anger. The smoke smells like protest. That same morning, you're ordered to unpick 3 coats and re-sew them without brass buttons. Brass is now considered collaboration, and several local boys have been chased through the market for wearing it. One coat, originally adorned with shiny gold fasteners, is replaced with rough carved bone, smoothed and darkened to look indistinct. The man who owns it watches you work with a strange reverence, like you're not sewing buttons, but removing shackles. "Now it looks like mine," he says when you're finished. "Now it speaks for me." The tailor says nothing but gives a small, approving nod. You think back to when buttons were just practical. Now, they're politics. A waistcoat's closure can be a declaration of independence. A lapel, a low-key insult to the monarchy. A seam, a coded warning to anyone who knows how to read. It's absurd, yes, but also inevitable. You work in silence, every stitch accompanied by the faint creak of floorboards above, where you suspect meetings are being held under the guise of family dinners. There's a tension now that goes beyond taxation or wool quotas. People are afraid, but they're also energized. You feel it in your own chest, that buzzing urgency, like the air itself, is charged with static. And yet, there are still coats to finish. The tailor insists that work is the one constant, the thread that holds everything together, pun very much intended. People need coats, he says, no matter who rules them. But you notice that he started reinforcing seams differently now, with stronger thread, with tighter stitching. The linings are heavier, as if he expects those wearing them to run, to fight, to bleed. You ask about it. "Better they survive a fall than look fashionable," he replies. "Style's no good if you're dead in a ditch." You laugh, but it's a quiet laugh. You're not sure if he's joking. He begins offering extra patches hidden inside the collar, or beneath the pocket flaps. Some are just cloth, some are printed words. One you notice is a small embroidered version of a pine tree. When you raise an eyebrow, he simply says, "They'll know." That day, a rider comes to the shop with a coat that's been slashed clean through, almost to the lining, not by wear, but by blade. He says nothing about it. You don't ask. The tailor repairs it silently, using a dark wool that makes the wound invisible. As the rider leaves, you catch a flash of a musket barrel beneath his cloak. He doesn't even try to hide it. There's a brazenness now, a refusal to pretend. Things are still normal. The city pulses with it. Taverns hum at night, with low conversations, and more men than ever wear coats with extra buttons sewn to the inside reversible garments. The kind you could wear inside out and vanish into a crowd. Historians argue about the role tailors really played in these early days. Some say they were neutral craftsmen, providing for both sides equally. Others claim they were quiet heroes, dressing the revolution from the inside out. The truth, like the stitches you make, is hidden tucked between layers of cloth and silence. One afternoon, you're asked to help outfit an entire group of men, all volunteers, though their boots and bruises tell another story. They want coats that match not in cut or color, but in shape and intent. They want coats that will let them move quickly, hide things, blend in. The tailor obliges, pulling down pattern after pattern, selecting fabrics from the stockpile you didn't know he'd kept. These aren't the cheap scraps you've been using. These are the good bolts, the ones he's been hoarding for the right moment, as he now explains. You cut and sew for 2 days straight, sleeping in shifts, eating cold bread and hot tea, and nothing else. By the end, the coats look simple, modest, but you know they're armor. You've lined them with quiet rebellion. One has a hidden knife pocket. Another has sleeves that can be removed and reattached in under 10 seconds. A third has no collar at all, won't get caught on anything the man says. They try them on, thank you, and leave before nightfall. The shop feels empty after that. The tailor doesn't speak much for the rest of the evening. That night, he drinks more than usual. We dressed them, he finally says. We can't pretend we didn't. You nod, understanding. This is what complicity feels like. Not shameful, exactly just heavy. Like a coat made of lead. In the morning, there's a quiet knock at the back door. A girl, maybe 12, stands with a bundle in her arms. She says her father didn't come back, and asks if you'll repair his coat. You unwrap it and see that it's stiff with dried blood. The tailor sighs. We can't fix everything, he says gently, but he takes it anyway. You clean it. You resew the hem. You reinforce the cuffs. When you give it back, she hugs it like it's a person. She says thank you and walks away. You don't ask where she's going. You suspect she doesn't know either. Word begins to spread that the British are tightening things. There are more patrols now, more searches. The shop is visited twice in the same week by soldiers, each time asking casual questions about who's been in, what's being made, and whether anyone has requested suspicious alterations. Your master smiles, polite as ever, and says only, "People are chilly, sir. They want sleeves." It works for now. But you know it can't last. That evening, he gives you a bundle wrapped in sailcloth. "If anything happens to me," he says, "you give this to the printer on Milk Street. He'll know what to do." You don't ask what's inside. You nod and hide it under the floorboards. You realize then that he doesn't expect to be here much longer. Or perhaps he doesn't expect the shop to survive what's coming. You look around and see the walls not as they are, but as they were. A safe place, a place of patience and skill, and quiet strength, and you feel something twist in your chest, a thread pulled too tight. You're not a soldier. You're not even particularly brave. But your hands know how to build things that last, that protect, that speak for the voiceless. And in this moment, you realize that you are part of the revolution, not with speeches or muskets, but with shears and chalk and thread. The storm is coming. You can hear it in the wind outside, in the brittle edge of the air. And still, people need coats. Still, people come. Still, you stitch. The storm doesn't break all at once. It creeps. The way a chill does under a coat's collar when you're not paying attention. Slowly spreading until you realize your whole back has gone cold. In Boston, that chill comes in the form of silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the watchful, tight-lipped kind. Shop doors are kept half open, half closed, eyes peering from behind curtains, and voices are lowered even during casual greetings. The tailor's shop, usually full of the rhythmic chatter of customers and apprentices, has grown so quiet you can hear the creak of every floorboard and the hiss of each breath. You're still sewing, still cutting, still brushing chalk lines across wool that smells like salt and dust. But every task carries the weight of expectation now, as if every seam you stitch might be the one someone depends on when running, or hiding, or worse. The customers still come, but differently. No one lingers. No one asks about fabric quality or trim anymore. Now they ask questions like, "Can I run in this?" Or if someone grabs me by the back, will it rip? One man wants a collar reinforced with horsehair. "It's not for posture," he mutters, "it's for protection." The tailor nods. He doesn't say from what. You already know. Word has spread of midnight arrests, of men pulled from their beds and questioned for nothing more than attending meetings or owning certain books. One boy, no older than 16, comes in with a black eye and asks for a coat that doesn't look like mine. You sew him something. Looser, longer, reversible. He thanks you and slips out the back. You never see him again. Historians argue about the turning point, whether it was a tax, a speech, a musket shot, but, from where you stand, elbow deep in wool scraps and waxed thread, it feels more like 1,000 small tears in the fabric of daily life. A fraying that can't be mended. Even the tailor, stoic as ever, begins to change. He works later, drinks more, and every few nights he has you take measurements, not for someone present, but from sketches. You realize he's making garments for people he's never seen, or rather, people who don't dare show themselves anymore. You start using false names in the ledger. The ink blots more than usual. One evening, a man arrives just as you're blowing out the candles. He carries a parcel, wrapped in canvas and tied with twine. His hands shake, but his voice is firm. "I need this altered," he says. Quickly you open it. Inside is a British officer's coat, red, pristine. Heavy, you freeze. The tailor steps forward. "Who is this for?" The man doesn't answer. He only repeats, quickly. The tailor sighs, nods, and gestures for you to help. You unpick the seams, sweating, careful not to slice the fabric too deep. You replace the lining with something plainer, remove insignia, dull the brass buttons with soot and vinegar. By the time you're done, it could pass for a merchant's riding coat. The man takes it, slips it on, and disappears into the fog. You never learn his name. "That was dangerous," you say. "So is loyalty," the tailor replies. In the days that follow, things unravel faster. A fire down the street takes out a quarter of the market. They say it was an accident, but you hear murmurs of a torch thrown during a midnight scuffle. A tailor's shop 2 blocks over is smashed, the windows broken, bolts of cloth scattered like leaves. You and your master board up your windows that night. "Just in case," he says, though you both know the boards won't stop determined men. Or muskets. You start sleeping in the shop now, next to the fire, with your boots on. The tailor moves his ledger to a hidden compartment in the workbench. You don't ask what's written inside. Better not to know. Better to just keep sewing. But even sewing begins to feel like a lie. How can you stitch a peaceful seam when everything outside is coming undone? You find yourself tightening sleeves, reinforcing hems, stitching extra layers into breast panels. No one asks for armor, but you give it to them anyway. A woman brings her son, thin and wide-eyed, and asks for a coat that won't show blood. You choose navy wool. It hides everything. Another man asks for hidden straps inside the coat lining. For a satchel, he claims. The tailor gives him straps strong enough to carry a musket. Still, no one says it out loud. No one dares name. What's happening? The silence is part of the revolution. It's a fabric as real as any you've stitched. And then, as winter presses deeper, a customer returns. An older gentleman, usually jovial, now pale and hoarse. They're closing the harbor. He says, "Nothing's coming in. Nothing's going out." You feel the words in your stomach before you hear them in your ears. No cloth, no thread, no buttons, nothing. It's Boston's punishment, you realize. The crown's noose has tightened. You go to the back room, check the shelves, and understand why the tailor has been hoarding scraps. These bolts, thin and faded and patched like old blankets, are now treasure. You run your fingers over a piece of rough brown linen and realize, this is it. This is what you have left to work with. You piece together coats from mismatched fabrics. You sew trousers from tablecloths. You stitch linings from what once was a drapery. One man proudly wears a waistcoat made from a dyed feed sack. Liberty doesn't care about silk, he says. It just wants to be worn. The tailor begins marking patterns on old newspapers. You use soot for chalk. You burn clippings for warmth. The shop becomes a cocoon of necessity, and every garment you make becomes a prayer. Please let them stay warm. Please let them stay hidden. Please let them come home. Then, one day, a boy bursts into the shop, breathless and muddy. They're marching, he says. Redcoats, out past the commons. They've got guns. He runs out before you can ask where. You and the tailor look at each other. Neither of you speak. You sew through the afternoon, but your hands tremble now. You prick your finger and barely feel it. Blood beads on the fabric. You leave it there. It's not the first blood this cloth has seen. That night, you stitch long past sunset. You line a coat with flannel that smells like smoke and salt. You reinforce a shoulder seam that has no business holding so much weight. You reattach buttons, with thread so thick it could bind a ship. You're not sure who the coat is for, only that someone will wear it and need it. The tailor places a candle near your bench and pats your shoulder. One day, he says softly, they'll say the revolution was sewn in a day. He smiles, tired and warm. They'll be wrong. It was sewn in thousands of stitches. In silence. And as the wind hisses outside, and the fire dies to orange glow, you realize you are one of those stitchiest mall, maybe. But strong, necessary. A part of something bigger than thread or wax or wool. You pick up your needle again. The storm has arrived. But still, you sew. The days blur now, one into the next, like ink bleeding across too-thin paper. Like a thread pulled through fabric again and again until it frays, and yet you keep stitching. You lose track of how many coats you've mended this week, how many pairs of trousers you've patched with scrap cloth and silent prayers. What you remember instead are the faces too young to wear war on their shoulders, too proud to ask for anything but warmth. They arrive in twos and threes, speaking softly, always watching the door behind them. One lad, freckles across, his nose and fear tight around his eyes, asks if you can tighten the cuffs just enough to hide something. You don't ask what, you just nod and do it. These aren't customers anymore. These are ghosts in training. They come and go like shadows, and when they thank you, their voices already sound like echoes. Your master is quieter too. He watches. The street from the upstairs window, his measuring tape looped around his neck like a noose, waiting to be pulled. When he speaks, it's often to himself, half thoughts about thread inventory, or how many yards, of course, linen remain behind the false panel in the cupboard. He hasn't taken on any new clients in days, but he hasn't closed the shop either. That's how you know things are serious, not because of what he says, but because of what he refuses to say. One evening, after you've swept the floor and doused the oil lamps, he gestures for you to follow him. In the back storeroom, behind a curtain of moth-bitten muslin, he lifts a floorboard you hadn't noticed was loose. Beneath it, a stash of garments. Coats mostly, but also breeches, shirts, even boots. All plain, all anonymous. For if they need to disappear, he mutters, everyone deserves an escape hatch. You nod, and your stomach tightens as you realize he's built an underground wardrobe, not for vanity, but for survival. He pulls out a faded coat and runs his hand along the seam. They think we're just dressing people, he says. But we're helping them shed their skins. And then one morning, the bell above the door rings too early, too hard. You look up and see two soldiers in red, real ones, not customers, not locals, not friendly. Their boots track mud across the floorboards as they enter without invitation. One of them lifts a finished coat from the rack and turns it in his hands. Very fine, he says. I trust you're not using this shop for anything improper. The tailor offers a thin smile, the kind you sew when you're down to your last thread. Only tailoring, sir. We mend what needs mending. The soldier snorts, drops the coat, and points to the ledger. Let me see your orders. Your heart races. You know what's in that book: real names, false names, coded notes. You also know the tailor swapped it out last week. The decoy. Ledger shows orders for wool mittens, choir robes, winter capes for the local church. Boring, innocent. We're a humble shop, the tailor says. No taste for drama. The soldiers linger, skeptical, but eventually they leave. When the door shuts behind them, you realize you've been holding your breath so tightly, your ribs ache. Your master chuckles softly. Red looks good on no one, he says. You laugh, just a little. It helps. After that, things quicken. The tailors of Bostan, once competitors, begin helping one another quietly. A man from across town sends a note tucked into a parcel of buttons. 2 more safe houses opened. Green thread signals access. You're given a small tin with spools of green thread, and you hide it beneath your cot. The tailor begins marking patterns not in chalk, but in invisible wax that appears only under heat. You're taught to read these ghost marks, to cut along lines no one else can see. You realize you're no longer just making coats, you're making maps. Capes with sewn-in directions. Coats that can be reversed to show an insignia. Sleeves designed to be torn and reattached in different configurations. Strange new dialect of clothing, meant to pass unnoticed through the chaos. One day, a woman enters in a hooded cloak and lowers her voice so far you can barely hear her. She needs a coat, she says, for her brother. He's on a list now, can't be seen. You ask his size, and she slides a paper across the table with precise measurements and a small square of fabric. Soft and blue-gray, like the morning. See, use this as the lining, she says. He'll know it came from home. You do. You build the coat carefully, each stitch slow and tight, and when she returns, her eyes glisten. He'll wear it like armor, she whispers. You wonder how many others are out there now, wearing your work as both shield and signal. Historians still debate. How many revolutionary outfits were made by official military sources, and how many were cobbled together in places like this: shops, behind shops. Apprentices sewing in candlelight, cloaks made from curtains and blankets. The romantic version says tailors were freedom fighters. The cynical version says they were just opportunists. The truth is quieter. You were just trying to help people survive. And yet, survival is its own kind of rebellion. One morning you wake to find a crude map pinned to the door. No words, just marks. Your master removes it and burns it immediately. That's not for us, he says. But you both know that even if the map wasn't addressed to your shop, Your shop is part of the network it described. The lines on that paper connect you all printer, to preacher, to blacksmith, to tailor. You feel like a knot in a much larger stitch, holding things together whether you know it or not. There's one final delivery, that wick-a-bolt of unmarked cloth left on the doorstep before dawn. It's midnight black, coarse but warm, not a luxury fabric, but one that promises strength. No note, no sender. Just a single strip tied around it with green thread. Your master says nothing. He simply puts it in the back room, carefully folded. That one, he says, we'll save for the march. The march, it's coming. You don't know when, but you feel it the way you feel a thunderstorm in your bones. The air tastes electric. Even the rats in the rafters have gone quiet. That night, as you oil the shears and check your needles set for wear, your hands move on their own. They know what to do. They've made too many coats to forget. You think of every person who's walked out that door wrapped in your work. You hope they're safe. You hope they're still warm. You hope somewhere in the darkness beyond Boston's narrow alleys and guarded gates, they're still moving forward, because if they are, if any of them are, then the thread hasn't broken yet. The next morning arrives with a fog so thick it muffles even the bells from the harbor ships, and Boston feels like it's been swallowed in wool. You walk to the front of the shop and wipe condensation from the inside of the window, but there's nothing to see, just a gray wall of damp air that clings to the glass like breath. You wonder who's out there, moving unseen. You wonder if anyone is. The tailor lights the morning lamp, even though it's already past sunrise. Can't trust what time it is anymore, he mutters, not when the sky refuses to speak. He says it like a joke, but it lands wrong. You feel it in your chest, the tension stretching tighter each day. The silence pressed hard against the windows. The way every knock sounds like it might be a boot rather than a friend. The shop remains open, at least technically, but customers now arrive more like messengers than buyers. Some bring cloth, others bring word. No one speaks freely anymore. We've got cousins traveling south, someone whispers while pretending to examine thread samples. Might need gear for the weather. Another taps twice on the counter, slides a folded handkerchief with a tiny stitched pine tree into your palm, and leaves without saying a word. You unfold it in private later. On the corner, in nearly invisible stitches, are 2 initials and a date. You memorize them. You burn the cloth. You add that name to the unspoken list. You and the tailor keep only in your heads. There's a rhythm now, not of commerce, but of resistance. Each stitch you make is no longer just part of a garment, it's part of a network. A signal, a message, disguised as a hemline. One coat has red lining only visible when the wind blows. Another has inside cuffs that can be folded and tied into straps. You've even begun to add little touches of your own, secret thread colors under collars, reinforced panels across shoulders, hidden pockets sewn into the space between lining and outer shell. You're building not just coats, but survival strategies, outfits that can carry a message, a musket ball, a loaf of bread. One woman asks if you can build a child's coat that grows a bit. You add buttoned seams and adjustable hems. They'll need it, she says. He's running with the rest of us. The tailor doesn't comment. He's begun working at odd hours, and some mornings you find him asleep in his chair, chalk still smudged across his hands. One afternoon he pulls you aside, presses something into your palm. It's a piece of cloth, folded tight. You open it, and see a tiny embroidered phrase. If I fall, finish it. He meets your eyes, but doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. You fold it and tuck it into your own coat pocket. You never take it out again. Then the rumors start. Not just about tax protests or militia drills in the woods, but real fighting. Skirmishes, a barn burned near Concord, a redcoat missing near Roxbury. A shopkeeper arrested for refusing to serve soldiers. The papers don't say much, but the streets say everything. People walk faster now, talk less. Coats are buttoned high, hats are pulled low. At night, the candlelight from windows flickers shorter, dimmer, and the city feels as though it's holding its breath. You're halfway through stitching a wool-lined riding cloak when the tailor looks up from his bench and says, "They're coming, sooner than they think." You pause, thread between fingers. How do you know? He reaches into a drawer and pulls out a pamphlet, one you haven't seen. It's marked with a crude sketch of the city, dates, arrows, circles. Someone slipped it in with the brass buttons, he says. They're planning something, a movement, big. He doesn't say who they are. He doesn't need to. You already know. That night, you make changes. You turn the cloak's lining into a map stitched, not printed. Roads marked by seams. Safe houses as knots. Waterways hidden in the creases. Only someone wearing it would know. You add a pouch near the hem, just wide enough for a rolled letter or a small pistol. You sew the final edge with black thread, so it disappears into the folds. It takes all night. When it's done, you lay it on the bench and feel something tighten in your chest. Not fear, not pride, just inevitability. The tailor sees it in the morning, runs his fingers along the collar. "It's your best one," he says, quietly. Then, he folds it, wraps it, and stores it with the rest. You suspect it will be worn by someone who will never know your name, but they'll feel your stitches when they run. Historians argue over how widespread this quiet tailoring revolution really was. Some believe only a few shops were involved. Others say every coat sewn between 1773 and 1776 carried something hidden, a pocket, a code, a prayer. Some say there were tailors who were double agents making garments for both redcoats and rebels, tracking measurements, listening to whispers, sewing information into thread counts. You don't know about any of that. You just know that in this shop, on this street, you've made things that speak louder than gunfire. Late one evening, a girl arrives at the door, soaking wet, breathless. "They need everything you have," she says. "Tonight, before dawn." She doesn't wait for a reply. She's gone before the tailor can even reach the stairs. You both know what that means. You go to the back, lift the false board, and bring out the bundled coats, capes, trousers, gloves. Everything you've made just in case. You load them into canvas sacks and tie them tight. The tailor pulls out the black cloak last. "This one leads," he says. "If it's read right," you nod. No words, none needed. Before sunrise, the packages are gone, carried off by figures in the fog, slipping between alleys like ghosts. You watch from the upstairs window, heart in your throat, needle still in hand. You don't sleep. You just sit there, watching the mist rise, and in that still moment, with the gray morning soft against the rooftops and the city not quite awake, you realize something. The revolution didn't come crashing in like thunder. It crept in, like a seamstress at dusk, silent and certain, working stitch by stitch, hidden from sight. Until one day, the whole fabric turned inside out and revealed what it had always been becoming. You go back to your bench. You pick up the shears, and you cut another pattern because someone, somewhere, will still need a coat. The morning after the last of the coats left, the shop is quieter than it's ever been, not the tense quiet of waiting for something to go wrong, but the stunned quiet of knowing something already has. The tailor doesn't speak much. You don't. Ask him to. There's nothing to say. Not after what passed through your hands in those final hours. The empty racks, the scraps on the floor, the chalk smudged across the workbench there, all that's left of the war. You've been quietly sewing for months. The shop looks less like a tailor's now, and more like a story that was just told too softly to be heard in time. Outside, the streets of Boston shift. There are fewer red uniforms, and when they do appear, they move cautiously, eyes scanning windows, hands close to muskets. You hear whispers that militia forces are massing outside the city, that the roads are being watched, that the river ferries are only carrying passengers in one direction. A boy runs past the shop one afternoon, laughing for no reason you can discern, and then vanishes around the corner. You watch the space where he was, wondering how many more will pass through this place unseen and unheard. Wrapped in the coats you made, customers stop coming altogether. Even the coated visits, though. Do you have something for colder weather, requests cease? It's not that the danger has passed. It's that danger has bloomed fully now, no longer whispered behind closed doors, but shouted in gunpowder and smoke. You hear the cannons days before you see anything. At first, you think it's thunder, then a cartwheel cracking on stone. But when it repeats slow, rhythmic, like a hammer pounding sheet metal in the sky, you know it's begun. The tailor listens, his head cocked toward the sound, fingers still moving across a seam. They've opened it, he says. No going back now. You nod, pretending not to notice how your own fingers tremble slightly over the stitching you're trying to finish. A simple coat, gray, modest, meant for no one in particular. Or maybe for anyone. You don't know anymore. Historians later debate the exact day that war truly began in Boston. Some say it was Lexington. Others claim it was Concord. But you know it started here, long before the shooting, long before the declarations. It started when the cloth stopped being just cloth, when buttons were no longer decoration, when a collar could carry meaning, and a stitch could carry hope. That's the revolution no one writes about, not the gunfire, but the tailoring. The tailor doesn't close the shop, but he stops unlocking the front door. He works from the inside now, behind shuttered windows and locked bolts. You keep two. The back, cutting fabric from leftover scraps, working by the light of a lantern shaded with blue paper so it can't be seen from the street. At night, the tailor reads by firelight letters, pamphlets, papers he won't share with you. He's not hiding them, he's just tired. One day, he says, someone will write this properly. Then he chuckles. With better grammar, more people leave the city. You hear the carts at night, the horses muffled, wheels rolling over cloth-covered stones to keep from drawing attention. One woman knocks at the shop's back entrance, a child asleep in her arms, and whispers, "Do you still have anything left? Anything warm?" You give her your own coat. She doesn't say thank you. She just nods, eyes wet, and disappears down the alley, wrapped in something that used to belong to you. You keep sewing, even when there's no one to wear what you make. It becomes a habit, a ritual. You stitch to fill time, to fill silence. The tailor keeps a small pile of garments in a trunk near the stairs, coats, in odd sizes. Mittens sewn from curtain scraps, cloaks made from mismatched fabric panels. They'll need these, he says. They always do eventually. Eventually arrives sooner than expected. Word spreads of redcoats retreating, of patriot forces closing in. You can feel the city tensing, like a thread pulled taut across a needles. Then, early one morning, there's a knock. 3 quick taps. You open the door and find a man you've never seen before. He looks like he hasn't slept in days. "We need uniforms," he says, "but not uniforms. Just something that makes us look like us." You know what he means. You pull out the black cloth, the last of the special stash. The tailor and you work without speaking, cutting wide sleeves, high collars, strong shoulders. You use every scrap. The men come at dusk and leave by nightfall, wrapped in garments that are neither British nor colonial militia, but something else entirely. Something new, something stitched from the ashes of Boston's silence. The shop feels different afterward. Hollow, maybe. Like a cocoon after the wings have unfolded and flown. You sit in the quiet, pressing a finished hem under your fingers, tracing the invisible stitches with your thumb. The tailor stands at the window, staring into the street. They won't remember this part, he says, almost too quietly to hear. They'll talk about the guns, not the coats. You look at your hands, at the calluses, the needle marks, the ghost of wax and wool under your fingernails. But they'll wear this part, you say, for the rest of their lives. He smiles faintly outside. A breeze rattles the shutters. You hear distant voices, shouting, singing, maybe both. The city is waking up, becoming something else, something braver, and it will need to be clothed in that bravery. In coats that don't flinch, in buttons that gleam with defiance, in collars that rise high against wind and fear alike. You roll your shoulders, flex your fingers, and pick up your shears, because the fighting has only just begun, and someone still has to make sure they're dressed for it. The morning after the city begins to stir with news of retreat, of reorganization, of sudden shifts in power that make even the birds fly differently overhead. You find yourself standing at the cutting table, not out of obligation, but out of instinct. The tailor is still asleep upstairs, his breath rattling faintly through the floorboards, a rhythm you've come to rely on like the ticking of a grandfather clock. You've memorized the sound of that wee soft faint. Tired, and it steadies you as you unroll a piece of cloth that you didn't know you still had. It's coarse, a little itchy to the touch, probably spun too quickly and dyed too carelessly. But it's fabric, it's possibility. And in these strange shape-shifting days, possibility is a precious commodity. You work quietly. The silence outside feels too fragile to break with hammers or saws, or even raised voices. In the distance, bells toll not. The usual church peals, but a short, sharp clang that could mean a meeting, a death, a victory, or some combination of the three. Boston has turned into a coat, itself reversible, depending on who's looking, and like a worn garment, it's fraying fast around the seams. The people still here are either too brave or too poor to flee, and many are both. They walk the streets with shoulders drawn, boots worn, eyes hollowed out from watching too much. You recognize a few of them. Some war coats you made. Some no longer do. The tailor descends the stairs by mid-morning, slower than usual. He doesn't ask what you're making, he just watches. Then, after a moment, he nods and walks to the front of the shop. He adjusts the wooden open sign that no one pays attention to anymore, wipes dust from the windowsill, and looks out at a city that no longer looks back. They'll need new uniforms soon, he says. Ones that mean something. You nod, but it's more complicated than that. What does meaning look like now? Is it red, or blue, or plain brown? Does it shine, or does it hide? Does it march proudly through the center of town, or disappear quietly into the forest at night? You cut fabric for both possibilities. A cloak for a woman who came through last week with a sling over her shoulder and asked for something with weight. A double-stitched waistcoat for a preacher who whispered scripture while tracing the outline of a dagger under his coat. And for yourself a vest, simple, gray, tight to the chest. You don't know why you make it. Maybe to remind yourself that you're still here, that you haven't disappeared into thread and chalk and smoke. Later, the tailor receives a letter. No address, no signature. Just a seal pressed into wax, an unfamiliar mark, something that looks like a tree split by lightning. He reads it slowly. When he's done, he folds it 4 times, places it into a small brass box, and locks it. They want a banner, he says. A proper one. You raise an eyebrow. What kind? He shrugs. The kind that won't get shot at immediately, hopefully. You both laugh. the kind of laugh that's more about keeping yourself sane than expressing joy. So you begin to design, not with ink, but with cloth. You experiment with folds, seams, layers. A cloak that turns into a flag that doubles as a blanket, a strip of cloth sewn with symbols that could be hidden against a body, wrapped around a rifle, or hung in a window to signal passage. You embroider discreetly stars, trees, initials. Nothing that would scream rebellion, but enough that those who know would recognize the language. And that's what it's become now, a language. Every coat you sew is a sentence. Every button a comma. Every patch a pause. The tailor jokes that you're writing a novel in wool, one that no one will ever publish, but everyone will read. You start noticing other tailors, those still left walking with purpose, carrying parcels that seem too heavy to be just cloth. You trade a spool of good linen thread for a bundle of charcoal wax used to mark paths through marshes. You give away 2 pairs of gloves to a boy who says his brother's hands shake too much now to fire a musket. You don't ask what he means. You just fit the gloves and send him on his way. Historians later find traces of this language in preserved garment coats with stitch patterns that don't match the rest of the fabric. Pocket placements that serve no logical purpose, linings that carry faint outlines of maps when held to candlelight. They call it tailored code, and they debate whether it was widespread or just the fantasy of romantic patriots looking for meaning in the ordinary. They'll never know for certain, because no one wrote it down. That was the point. You didn't need to. It was sewn. A few days later, someone leaves a bolt of indigo cloth on your doorstep. No note, no explanation. Just the fabric, cleanly cut and carefully folded. You recognize the weave, tight, expensive, rare. You've only handled it once before, for a merchant's wife who needed a riding coat to escape the city unseen. The tailor lifts the bolt with reverence. "We'll make something lasting with this," he says. You don't ask for whom. You already know the answer. Everyone. Anyone. That night, you work by lamplight, fingers raw from days without rest. The tailor hums a song under his breath, some old folk melody that doesn't quite match the tempo of your stitching, but keeps you grounded anyway. Together, you piece together a coat unlike any other. It's not for running, or hiding, or even fighting. It's ceremonial, regal, in its way. The sleeves are long and sweeping, the shoulders broad, the lining stitched with the initials of places that no longer exist in the way they did a year ago. It's stitched with memory, with grief, with hope. And when it's done, you step back and realize it's not just a coat. It's a future waiting to be worn. The tailor drapes it over a mannequin by the window. No one will see it, not yet. But it will wait, like everything else in this city, for the right moment to be needed, to speak without speaking. Outside, you hear footsteps, soft and fast, like someone running without wanting to be heard. A shadow darts past the window, then nothing. The silence returns. But this time, it doesn't feel empty. It feels full. Charged, like a held breath. You sit. You rest your hands in your lap. You look at the coat by the window, bathed in soft yellow light. And you realize, as you so often do these days, that you are not just a tailor. You are a witness, a scribe, a quiet architect of change. And the thread runs through you still, strong as ever. The weather begins to change, and with it, the feel of the air in the shop. There's a heaviness to the humidity that clings to your skin as you sew, making wool harder to handle, linen less forgiving. The tailor opens the windows just a crack, but even that small act feels dangerous now. The street outside is no longer predictable. One day, it's a parade of street hawkers and chatter. The next, it's dead quiet, save for the creak of carts carrying wounded men, or the sharp whistle of a scout slipping through the alley. The war, it seems, has found its way not just into the hills and towns, but into the fibers of the city itself, into every crevice of daily life, and certainly into the seams of every coat you cut. The tailor's hands have started to shake. You notice it first when he struggles to thread a needle, then when he accidentally pricks his thumb and pretends not to notice the blood. "Must be the heat," he says, but you know better. He hasn't slept properly in weeks. Neither have you. The shop is turned into a strange kind of church, silent, reverent, filled with the whispered prayers of those who pass through to collect more than clothing. You begin keeping odd hours, working late into the night and waking before the sun. You find yourself whispering as you sew, not because anyone is listening, but because loud voices feel unnatural now, like a sin against the quiet bravery being stitched into every hemline. One afternoon, a man arrives wearing the kind of boots that don't belong to this part of town, soft-soled, expensive, clean. His coat is too fine, his voice too polished. He doesn't give a name, only a request. "I need 3 vests, identical black wool, lined with dark green." You nod slowly when, "Tonight," he replies. The tailor raises an eyebrow, but doesn't object. The man lays coins on the counter, more than enough, and leaves without looking back. You don't ask questions. You cut quickly. You choose the darkest buttons, the strongest thread. You line the pockets with waxed linen and add narrow slips, just wide enough to carry something small but important, a flint, a folded paper, a thin blade. When the man returns after sunset, he's accompanied by 2 others. All 3 take their vests in silence. One of them smiles, barely, and says, "You'll hear about us soon," and then they're gone. The tailor watches the door after they leave. "I don't want to know," he mutters. "But you both know. You already do. They weren't ordinary men. They weren't here for fashion. They were operatives, rebels, messengers, something between those lines. Their vests will vanish into the night, like everything else. But the knowledge that your stitches may travel with them into danger tightens in your chest, like a belt singed too close to the ribs." Historians later dispute the involvement of tailors in espionage efforts. Some call it myth-making, a post-war attempt to assign meaning to the mundane. But you know otherwise. You know about the folded cloth sewn into a hat lining that matched the layout of a British supply depot. About the carefully dyed thread that marked safe travel routes, one color for land, another for river. About the coat you once made for a man who was shot 3 weeks later, whose diary noted plainly, "Taylor's shop was the last safe stop." You never learned his name. You remember his smile. Days blur again, time becoming measured not by clocks, but by footsteps, by how many coats you've finished, by how often you must say no to requests, because the cloth simply isn't there anymore. You run out of navy wool, then brown, then even the coarse black that's hard to dye evenly. The tailor opens his last secret stasha, bundle of offcuts, mismatched panels, odd colors. "We'll make do," he says, voice resigned but steady. So you piece things together, sleeves from one bolt, collars from another. You create patterns not with fashion in mind, but utility, strength. Message. The children come next, not as customers, but as couriers. One girl, no older than 10, arrives with a bundle under her arm. "This is from the widow Carter," she says. She says it's got history in it. You open it and find a quill told, faded, and stitched, from scraps of dresses, tablecloths, even horse blankets. You nod. You and the tailor make 4 cloaks from it, each one different, each one lined with memories. "They'll be warm, you promise?" The girl nods. "They'd better be," she says. "My brother's out in it." The tailor falls ill that week. He insists it's nothing, just a cold, but you can hear the rattle in his lungs. and his appetite fades like sun on old linen. You take over most of the cutting, most of the planning. He sits near the fire, wrapped in a coat that once belonged to a preacher. He still mends now and then, buttons. Mostly he watches. "You're better than I ever was," he says one night. "Don't let this place go to waste when I'm gone." You want to tell him not to talk like that he's not going anywhere. But your voice catches. Instead, you nod. And then you sew faster. Because sometimes a moving needle is the only thing that keeps grief at bay. And then, without warning, the air shifts again. A boy runs down the alley one morning, shouting something you can't quite hear. Then two men on horseback follow, their faces alight with something new relief, maybe joy. They've done it. One calls out, "Evacuated." The British have evacuated. You blink. You look out at the street. The silence has cracked. Cheers rise from windows. Laughter bubbles up like a sudden flood. Doors open. Feet hit cobblestones. The city, quiet for so long, bursts to life like a bell struck in the dark. Boston is free. The tailor cries not loudly, not theatrically, but silently, with tears that slide down into his grizzled beard and disappear into the folds of his old wool coat. "We did it," he whispers, stitch by stitch. And then he falls asleep by the fire, the deepest sleep he's had in weeks, that night. You sit by the window, listening to the sounds of celebration songs, clapping, dancing, but you don't join them. Not yet. You need a moment to breathe, to let your hands rest, to let the reality settle. Your work has survived. Your stitches have held. And soon, they will be needed again, this time, not for hiding or running, but for building something new. The day after the redcoats leave Boston, the city feels like it's waking up from a long and uneasy sleep. You step out into the street for the first time in what feels like months, without glancing over your shoulder. The air still carries the scent of gunpowder and smoke, but underneath it, there's something sweeter: fresh bread from reopened ovens. Wood smoke from hearths lit again, not to hide in silence, but to cook for neighbors. People start speaking louder, walking slower. There's a looseness in the way they move now. Like everyone's coats have suddenly become one size too large, knots from weight loss, but from the shedding of fear. It feels unnatural at first. Then it feels like sunlight. The tailor watches. The change from the shop window, wrapped in his coat and sipping weak tea. He doesn't move as fast anymore. His cough has deepened. You worry, though you don't say it aloud. "They'll want uniforms now," he murmurs. "Proper ones. Not just coats, stitched in secret." And he's right. Within days, the shop sees its first formal request from the new local militia: several bolts of navy blue wool, brass buttons, a list of sizes scrawled in a hand that's too eager to be neat. You trace the names down the page. Some you recognize. Others are new, fresh recruits for a brand new world. The revolution isn't hiding anymore. It's here, in daylight, with paperwork. You clear the workbench, oil the shears, sweep the sawdust and loose thread from the floor. It feels strange, returning to official tailoring. Strange and slightly hollow. These uniforms won't be smuggled under cover of night. They won't carry coded stitches or hide in plain sight linings. They'll be inspected, counted, polished. Not secrets anymore, but statements. Still, they need to be made. So you make them. You work with quiet determination, constructing jackets that gleam when turned just right in the light. Crisp lapels, reinforced buttons, pleats that speak of order and unity. The tailor smiles as you work, and sometimes offers a note or correction, but mostly he lets you lead. "You're the master now," he says one evening. "I'm just the thread in the corner." You laugh. "A stubborn thread," you reply. still holding the seam together. He chuckles, but doesn't deny it. In between the official orders, people still come in needing other things. Practical things. A woman brings in a wedding dress, yellowed and too small. "It was my mother's," she says. "Can you make it fit?" You do. You expand the waist with a strip of fabric cut from an old officer's jacket, blending war and love into one quiet gesture. A man arrives with a boy in tow, holding a ripped cloak and a hesitant smile. He wants to be a tailor now, he says. You show the boy how to hold a needle without pricking his thumb, how to fold cloth along the grain. He grins. It's the first pure joy you've seen in days. Historians will later debate whether this time, the short, uncertain months after Boston's evacuation, was a pause between storms or the beginning of something new. Some say it was the lull, before the nation truly took form. Others say it was the only time Boston breathed freely, before politics hardened into bureaucracy and glory gave way to governance. But for you, it's something quieter. It's the period where a city began, stitching itself back together, not with declarations, but with thread. You start keeping a new kind of journal, not with words, but with scraps. You paste them into a large ledger. Bits of blue wool from militia coats, gray linen from refugee cloaks, a button from a preacher's waistcoat, a ribbon from the wedding dress. Each one tells a story you don't write down, but you remember. It becomes your private history, one only your hands can read. The tailor grows weaker by the week. Some days, he doesn't come downstairs at all. You bring him tea, small meals, the morning paper. He reads the headlines and scoffs. "They'll never mention us," he says. "No one ever writes about the Tailors." You shrugged. "They'll wear us, though." He nods, but his eyes are far away. You stay beside him anyway. One evening, as the sun lowers behind the rooftops and paints the city in shades of amber and ash, he calls you over. In his hand is a package wrapped in muslin. "For when I go," he says simply. "Don't open it until then." You don't want to take it. You want to believe you won't need to. But you do. You place it on the highest shelf, behind a bundle of unused silk dot. Soon, the orders slow again. Not from fear this time, but from planning. The militias are moving south. Congress is calling for uniforms in Virginia, the Carolinas. One day, a courier arrives, asking if you'll relocate. "We need your skills down near Philadelphia," he says. You glance around the shop, its windows fogged, its shelves weathered, its floor stained with years of chalk and sweat. You shake your head. "This is where I belong." The courier nods and leaves behind a note. If you change your mind, you don't. But you begin to send work south. Anyway, bundled coats, stitched by candlelight, packed into crates marked as tools you trust, they'll arrive. They have to. The tailor passes on a quiet night. No drama, just a long, soft breath that never returns. You sit beside him until morning, holding his hand, listening to the shop creak around you. You open the package. Inside is a vest unfinished. One sleeve still pinned, collar not yet turned. It's meant for you. The fabric is familiar. Indigo strong. The lining bears a single line stitched in tiny black thread. You carried it farther than I ever could. You finish it that afternoon. Not because you have to, but because you want to. When it's done, you wear it in the shop. The city outside moves on, faster now, louder. But inside the shop, the silence returns. And this time, it feels earned. Because now, you're not just carrying on a legacy. You're stitching a new one, with every coat, every thread, every quiet act of care. The seasons begin to shift again, and with them, the sounds of the city. The heavy silence of war has given way to the clamor of rebuilding. Hammers echo from rooftops where shingles are being replaced. Wagons rattle with fresh supplies instead. of whispered cargo, and children reel laughing. Dirt on the knees, children play stickball in the alley that once only carried messengers in the dark. You stand in the doorway of the shop, arms crossed, a needle tucked behind your ear, and you watch them run. The noise no longer startles you, it comforts. You let the sun touch your face. It's been too long since you've allowed that. The tailor's old chair sits empty, but you don't remove it. You can't. It stays beside the hearth, cushion worn smooth, the arms polished by time. You've started leaving a folded coat on its backrest every evening before you lock up, a quiet habit. Not out of superstition, but respect. You don't speak aloud to it, but sometimes you catch yourself glancing over when you finish a seam, as if waiting for him to nod in approval. Some habits, like certain stitches, hold no matter how much time passes. Business changes. People now want celebration clothes, bright sashes, well-cut trousers, waistcoats with a bit of flourish. You sew for weddings, for banquets, even for the first official city ball, held in the public house. An event that features more homemade wine than anyone can handle, and ends with 2 councilmen passed out on borrowed benches. You smile at the thought as you stitch silver trim onto navy coat for a man who now calls himself captain, though you remember him as a baker. Well, he says with a wink, I was needing dough, now I'm needing freedom. The joke is terrible. The sentiment, sincere. Still, not all requests are easy. Some come in quiet, from the edge of town. From mothers who bring coats that no longer fit their sons, because their sons no longer have arms to fill them. Others ask for black garments, not for mourning, they insist, but for resolve. I'm still fighting, one woman says, eyes firm. Just in different ways. You sew each piece with care, but something shifts inside you. Joy is not untouched by grief. And you begin to realize that the work you do now isn't just about victory, it's about memory. A traveling painter comes through and asks to sketch your shop. He wants to paint the window with the morning light slanting through it, the bolts of fabric lined up like soldiers. Your workbench cluttered with chalk, scissors, pins. He asks if you'd mind being in it. Not a portrait, he says. Just a moment. You agree. You sit by the window and pretend to hem a sleeve, while he captures it in charcoal first, then oils. When he leaves, he gifts you the sketch. Simple piece, no flourish, no fanfare. Just you and the shop. You hang it on the wall where the tailor used to keep his pattern books. Historians will one day puzzle over how much influence these quiet shops had on the revolution. How many rebel uniforms were sewn by candlelight. How many messages tucked into linings. They'll wonder how clothing choices, like a sash, worn over the left shoulder instead of the right, carried layered meaning, a unit's pride, a secret cause, a town's quiet defiance. Some scholars suggest that Boston's tailors operated like a shadow network, measuring not just waists, but loyalties. Others insist this is folklore, stitched onto the facts after the war ended. But you remember. You don't need documentation. You've got muscle memory. Every coat still lives in your hands. You decide to take on an apprentice. Not because you need help, but because someone asked you to. My niece, the woman said. She's got quick fingers and stubborn eyes. Reminds me of someone. The girl arrives with a satchel full of broken needles and a grin full of questions. Do you ever sew flags? She asks. Only accidentally. You reply. She giggles. You teach her to measure twice. 2 press seams flat with the heel of her hand. To test thread by snapping it between her teeth. She picks it up fast. Faster than you did. And she doesn't flinch when the stories come. Was it scary? She asks. You think a moment. It was necessary. She doesn't ask again. Soon she's making her first garments, a small cloak for her brother, a shirt for herself, both crooked at the hem but tight at the heart. You correct her gently. You show her how to patch without bulk, how to stitch without wasting motion. She listens. You catch her whispering to the fabric sometimes, as if trying to pass along secrets. You don't stop her. You used to do the same. The city shifts again. Elections come. Debates grow loud. Politicians emerge from behind tavern doors. There's talk of printing laws, of forming committees. The revolution, once stitched into shadows, now prints itself in typeface. It doesn't need as many secret coats anymore, but it still needs tailors. For ceremonies, for councils, for officers who want a bit of flash now that the danger has passed, and even for the school teacher who wants to look sharp at his first assembly in the new schoolhouse. Not for the children, he insists. For me. You make those coats too. One rainy afternoon, a delivery cart arrives carrying 3 crates. Inside are garments tattered, smoke-scarred, blood-stiffened, some bear badges, some bear names stitched in fading thread. They've been returned from battlefields in the south. A note accompanies them. We want them preserved, repaired if possible. They carry stories. You don't breathe for a moment. Then you lift the first coat, navy blue, torn across the side, brass button half melted. Your apprentice watches you, waiting. You nod to her. Let's begin. She doesn't ask whose coat it was. She doesn't need to. She knows it matters. You work carefully, not to erase the damage, but to honor it. You patch around the holes. You clean the fabric gently, preserving stains like birthmarks. You reinforce the seams, polish the buttons, press the cloth flat. These coats won't be worn again. They'll hang in halls, behind glass, but they'll still speak, and people will listen. You begin labeling them, tiny tags sewn inside, not visible to most, just dates, initials, places. One reads, Monmouth, June 28th. Another SP, no rank, no regiment. You keep that one close. You remember the boy who brought gloves for his brother. You never saw him again. You suspect this was his. You mend it with extra care. At night, the shop feels almost holy against soft candlelight. The rhythmic scratch of thread through cloth, and the silent presence of memory in every corner. The apprentice sleeps in the loft now. You often find her curled up in the fabric piles, dreaming in color. You cover her with a finished coat each night and let her be. And as you stitch, you realize the war may be ending, but the story isn't. The thread continues, winding through new lives, new cities, new generations. And you are its keeper. Quiet, steady, essential. The colder months creep back into Bostan, and with them comes a stillness, not of fear, but of reflection. The streets no longer crackle with the sharp echo of boots or the hushed urgency of secret meetings. Instead, you hear the muffled crunch of frost beneath wheels, the distant hum of firewood being chopped, and on certain mornings, the slow ringing toll of a ship's bell as new cargo arrives at the harbor. Full not of soldiers or munitions, but textiles, dyes, and wool from friendlier ports. The revolution has shifted again from musket fire to meetings, from blood to ink, from resistance to rebuilding. You spend your days in the shop working on garments that feel heavier now, not because of weight, but because of meaning. Magistrates want coats that fit their newfound status. Veterans arrive with medals in hand, asking you to affix them in ways that look humble yet heroic. You do your best. Some want entire uniforms remade in finer cloth wool, instead of homespun, trim replaced with polished brass. But others, perhaps, more honest in their pride, ask only for a fresh lining or a patched tear, wanting to preserve the scuffs and scorch marks that remind them of what they endured. Your apprentice is becoming fast and sharp with her stitching. You catch her correcting your pattern placements now and then, never disrespectfully, but with a kind of unspoken eagerness that only the young possess. She's started keeping her own notebook, a cloth-bound thing where she sketches designs not for customers, but for herself. She's imagining a future where fashion and function coexist, where coats aren't just armor against the world, but a language of their own. You don't interfere. You encourage her with quiet nods, and sometimes you pass her the better scissors. She beams when you do. One morning a tall man arrives. His boots are caked with southern dust, and his accent is tinged with the Carolinas. He places a folded garment on the counter and says nothing. You open it to find a coat you made 2 years ago, distinctive triple-stitched sleeves, dyed with a peculiar mixture that gave the wool a smoky hue. You remember the night it was requested. You remember the urgency, the silent payment, the name never spoken. You look at the man. He nods once. He made it to the river, he says. Didn't make it past it. You nod back. You do not cry, but you press your fingers into the seam and let the memory settle there. He leaves with a new coat, simpler, warmer, no payment taken. You call it even. Historians still argue whether Boston's tailors truly functioned as an unofficial communication network. Some claim the coat codes and stitched maps were isolated incidents. Others, combing through old garments and archives and collections, point to patterns that appear too deliberate to be coincidence. An extra button sewn near the hem, invisible. Thread changes along the inner lapels, linings made of homespun from specific regions, only those in the know would recognize. Whether or not these theories are ever fully proven, you know the truth. The coats spoke. They still do. As winter deepens, a new commission arrives, an unusual one. A small town to the west is preparing a memorial ceremony for those lost in the early days of the war. They want a banner, hand-stitched, incorporating fabric donated by the families of the fallen. You agree immediately. In the weeks that follow, parcels arrive by horse and cart. Sleeves from wedding dresses, handkerchiefs, cravats, even pieces of old uniforms, stained and torn but carefully labeled. You and your apprentice sort each piece, matching colors, textures, and meanings. You let the cloth tell you how it wants to be arranged. The banner takes shape slowly, a mosaic of grief and pride. You sew late into the night, pausing only to sip warm cider or stretch your sore hands. Your apprentice embroiders names with tiny gold thread, her brow furrowed in reverence. You hang the finished banner across the shop one day before its delivery, and for a moment the room feels like a cathedral. You don't say anything, neither does she. You just stand and breathe it in. When the wagon comes to take the banner, the driver steps down with eyes already wet. "It's beautiful," he says. "More than we hoped." You nod. "It was already beautiful when it arrived," you reply. "We just listened." The apprentice watches the wagon leave, then turns to you. "Do you think there'll be another war?" she asks. You pause. The snow outside is falling in thick, slow flakes, the kind that hushed the world. "There's always another war," you say, "but not always the same kind." She doesn't ask what you mean. She's beginning to understand that revolutions aren't only fought with guns and treaties, but with quiet acts of care, of resistance, of memory. One morning in early March, you find a group of young men waiting outside the shop before you've even lit the hearth. They wear mismatched clothes, carry journals and books, and their leader, red-haired fellow with a pen tucked behind his ear, introduces them as a society of preservationists. They've come to collect any old patterns, unused scraps, or notes from the war years. They want to preserve what they call textile heritage, and though the phrase makes you smile, you admire the spirit behind it. You give them copies of certain coat designs, offer them a spool of thread dyed with elderberry you never used, and gently explain which techniques are better left undocumented. Some secrets, you tell them, are stronger when whispered. They nod, wide-eyed, grateful. Before leaving, One of them shyly hands you a paper. It's a poem, written about your shop, about the tailor's chair, about the button that held a dream. You don't read it aloud. You fold it into your ledger, between two swatches of wool. You'll keep it there forever, and as the last snow melts into slush, and spring peeks cautiously around Boston's corners, the shop remains what it's always been, a place of transformation. Not just of fabric, but of people. Of fear into courage. Of silence into purpose. You stitch not just to clothe, but to honor. To remember. To continue. Because somewhere, someone still needs a coat. And someone like you must still be here to make it. Spring settles over Boston, not like a sudden burst of life, but like a slow, familiar guest, who finally decides to stay for tea. The ice loosens its grip on gutters and cobblestones. Trees stretch their knotted limbs again. The harbor, once clogged with warships and smoke, now ripples with merchant sails. Brighter, fuller, less ominous. Life begins to assert itself in the small ways first. A boy whistling down the alley. Girls in lighter skirts chasing after chickens. A mother hanging laundry without glancing nervously over her shoulder. You feel it too, in your bones and in the fabric. Heavy wools are folded away. Lighter linens, bleached by the weak spring sun, return to the table. And in your fingers, the motions of peace start to feel less like betrayal and more like grace. You spend mornings in quiet concentration, letting the workshop breathe through open windows. The smell of fresh sawdust from a nearby carpenter's project drifts in, mixing with the lemon oil you use to clean your scissors. A songbird lands on the sill one day and hops around the fabric bolts like it owns the place. Your apprentice tries to shoo it, but you laugh. Let it have a look, you say. Maybe it's got opinions about hem lengths. Orders are slower now, but more personal. A man wants a new coat, not for battle, but for courting. He stammers awkwardly while describing the woman in question. Brown curls, fierce temper, excellent baker, and you help him choose a color that might catch her eye, without making him look like he's trying too hard. A mother comes in with fabric she's been saving since before the siege. This was for my son's wedding, she says softly, but now, it will be for his child's christening. You sew with tears in your eyes, but steady hands. Then, one afternoon, a group of travelers arrives. They're not locals, wrong accents, too many ink stains on their fingers, and one of them wears a jacket with embroidery that looks more French than Bostonian. They introduce themselves as pamphleteers, writers, and chroniclers. We're collecting stories, one says. From the revolution, not just battles, but the invisible bits. The quiet things. You arch an eyebrow. Tailors are quiet, you say. Our thread doesn't scream. He smiles. Exactly. They sit at your table for hours, asking questions, sketching, occasionally borrowing scraps of cloth to feel between their fingers as they take notes. Your apprentice watches closely. She's learned to study people the way you once did, by how they carry their shoulders, where they rest their hands. One pamphleteer notices her watching and asks, "And you? What's the most important thing?" "You've sewn." She blushes. A lining, he echoes. She nods. If you get that part wrong, the whole thing pulls sideways. They all nod in appreciation. They'll quote her in their next pamphlet, no doubt. And someone in New York or Philadelphia will marvel at the wisdom of Boston's young tailors. Later, you guide them to the shelf, where you've stored the tailor's old notebooks. You let them see the pages, some with clear diagrams, others with scribbles that only the two of you ever fully understood. There's a moment of silence as they flip through the drawings. Concealed pockets, false hems, button placements that told 1,000 silent stories. One writer says, "This is the revolution too, isn't it?" And you simply reply, "It always was." Historians may debate the importance of a coat's cut or the thread's direction, but there's no arguing the weight of a garment when it carries memory. Years from now, someone will stumble upon one of your coats in a trunk or a museum, trace the stitching with a finger, and wonder what it meant. Whether that uneven seam was an error or a message. Whether the reinforced shoulder was for battle, for labor, or for love. Whether the tailor who made it understood what they were shaping. You still keep the tailor's chair empty, though your apprentice sometimes sits in it now, unconsciously, when she sketches her newest ideas. You don't stop her. The chair's spirit is generous. It welcomes the future, and the future does come in strange new shapes. A man enters one morning, asking for a travel coat, one that can withstand multiple climates, rough terrain, and unexpected weather. Where are you going, you ask? West, he says. Maybe far west. You nod and make the coat. It's lined with thin wool, layered for insulation, and dyed in a way that won't attract attention. It's not for war, but for a kind of adventure that holds its own dangers. As you pack it for him, you whisper, "Be safe." He smiles. "I'll carry Bostan with me." You hope so. A group of schoolchildren visits the shop on a spring outing, led by a schoolmistress who smells faintly of chalk and lavender. They're studying revolutionary trades, she explains. You show them bolts of cloth, teach them the names of toolsel, thimble, bodkin, and let them try threading a dull needle for fun. One boy asks, "Did you really help win the war with a needle?" You smile. "I didn't win anything. But I helped keep people warm while they did." He considers this, then nods solemnly, as if that's the highest honor imaginable. Your apprentice stitches a new banner that week just for the shop. It's simple. A dark blue background with a gold thread needle looping through the center, and below it, stitched words in careful block letters. "Mend stitch, remember." You hang it above the door. It sways gently in the breeze each time. Someone walks into war, and the ones that walked out. You think about how something so soft can survive something so hard, and every night, before you put out the lamps and sweep the last thread from the floor, you fold the day's garments over the tailor's chair, still honoring him, still honoring the thread, because you are a tailor, and you are not done sewing yet. The summer sun begins to stretch its arms wide across the city, pouring golden heat down the cobblestones and making the window glass of the shop shine like mirrors. Inside, the air is thick with the mingled scent of beeswax, polish, and pressed linen, a reminder that lighter garments now take center stage. You exchange wool bolts for rolls of muslin and raw cotton, shifting your touch from the heavy drape of winter cloth to the almost translucent lightness of summer fabric. Each material has its own temperament, and you've learned to listen to them like old friends. Some are stubborn, some unpredictable, and some, like the fine Indian cotton a merchant delivers one morning, behave like water in your hands. You're surprised how many people still come to you, not for secrets anymore, but for significance. A woman wants a white dress for her daughter's graduation. A man asks for a new vest to wear to a reading of the Declaration of Independence on Boston Common. He wants the buttons to gleam. You choose a row of polished shell closures from your dwindling personal stash, the ones you've saved for something special. "Why?" your apprentice whispers. "He's not important." "But he is," you reply. "He's remembering." "That's always important." You begin offering something new in the shop tailoring lessons. Not formal ones, not written on a sign, just quiet guidance to those who ask. A former soldier with trembling hands comes in wanting to learn how to sew a button back on his coat. "I lost so much," he says. "I'd like to fix at least one thing myself." You hand him a thick needle, thread it for him, and guide. His hands, his first few stitches, are a disaster. The fourth one lands, The fifth one sticks. He doesn't smile, but his shoulders lower a bit. That's enough. Your apprentice watches it all, absorbing the craft, not just of tailoring, but of listening. She's bolder now, designing a line of children's coats with removable sleeves, so they can grow with the child, she explains. It's a simple idea. It's brilliant. You nod, quietly stunned. She grins and says, even clothes want second chances. You wonder how many second chances you've sown over the years. Probably more than you'll ever know. One morning, a group of uniformed officials arrives at your shop well-fed, well-dressed, full of committee titles and political purpose. They've come with a request. The city is forming a new council, one that will travel to neighboring colonies to advise on forming a united front. We need coats, one of them says. Matching ones. Subtle, but proud. You arch an eyebrow, so not red. That earns a chuckle. Definitely not red. You spend days designing these coats: navy wool, high collars, crisp lapels, each with a hidden pocket inside the left breast. Not for secrets now, but for folded speeches, maps, and the occasional peace offering. You line them with cream silk, and sew a single gold stitch inside each hem. You never tell them why. You don't need to. They wear them with reverence. The tailor's chair sits quietly in the corner through it all, always bearing the coat of the day. But now, sometimes, your apprentice places something there. To a sketchbook,